Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co host, Cameron McAllister. In this episode, we talk about the vibe shift that's happening with regard to Pride Month. Maybe it's just the two of us, but it just doesn't seem to be as big of a deal this year. There's less enthusiasm everywhere, less of a major hubbub in the media. So, what's going on? We talk about those changing social dynamics, and we think this will be helpful to you as you think through the changing landscape of our culture. As always, if you find value in what we do, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to support the work we do, you can do so by going to www.toltogether.com. Click that donate button. Thank you so much.
Cameron, usually in the month of June we get a episode in on Pride Month, one way or the other, and it's been weird. I don't know if it's like just there's a whole lot more going on in the world this June, or it just doesn't feel like I'm hearing as much about Pride Month. I mean, there are the few traditional parades here and there, but it didn't feel like we had the same level of corporate um, advertising. I didn't
Buy-in.
get the same level of Amazon ads and, even in your shopping experiences and stuff. And so I don't know if there's a statistical shift there or has your it's kinda like, I don't know if it's one of those things like shark bites, like, it seems like a lot of people are being attacked by sharks when there's nothing else in the news. Is Pride Month a bigger deal when there's nothing else going on in the news? Or is there a legitimate, where people are it's lost sort of its edginess or it's people are kinda like, "Yeah." Is that what's your sense on the Atlanta end of things?
Right, of course, and of course, Atlanta is a Pride Month hub. My sense on it, Nathan, is that it is cooling, and my sense on it actually is broader. This will take us into broader territory. I don't wanna lose sight of the subject here entirely, but my sense is that the kind of identity politics and fierce individualism, that there's a growing fatigue with it.
Mhm.
I think people are tired of the incessant well, on the one hand, the incessant screaming and shouting from the rooftops about, "Here's how I define myself." There's fatigue there. There's fatigue with the constant politics of it, but then there's also a growing sense of the hollowness of individualism. I think this is one of the outworkings of the meaning crisis in our culture. People want more than just their own narrow kind of range of preferences. So, yeah, I'm not qualifying any of this with statistical analysis or numbers. I mean, we could cite, of course, the growing interest in religion in general, the growing interest in spirituality, and the growing interest in a real kind of depth to Christianity, or
Mhm.
in-depth Christianity. There's a growing appetite for that. All of that seems to indicate that we are outgrowing some of this individualism and some of this the kind of identity politics. And also, yeah, Nathan, there are major things happening in the world right now. There's an impending, war with Iran. And people, and as always happens in these kinds of instances, Nathan, there's this kind of knee-jerk response of, "Oh my gosh, well, what does this mean? Is nuclear war possible?" And then all of a sudden, everybody thinks history is really interesting again, and we're trying to get real quick answers to what might happen and what might play out. But which is funny in and of itself. I mean, the threat of nuclear war has never gone away. By the way, that kind of was here to stay as soon as
All the
nuclear
all
or
the
atomic
people who
weapons
didn't
and
know what a
aluminum
mullah was
ceased.
a month ago are now Middle East experts. It's great.
Yeah. So
So
yeah, I think those are some of the factors contributing to a kind of it's more lukewarm right now. And yeah, I think that's my feel here too.
it's interesting. So one of the places that I think, again, this is not scientific, this is just anecdotal, is where you see cultural shifts happen is in comedy. And you do have a higher degree now, I think, of you'll hear more jokes along the line of like, look, you know, if you're the president of a country that's, leads a successful revolution and brings freedom to the country, or you sign yeah, you free the slaves, you get celebrated one day a year. We take one day a year to celebrate all of the people who have given their lives dying for their country. However, if you identify as this, you get a whole month. Um, and these are not like conservative
Right.
comedians.
Yeah.
They're just there's more of like a sense of like, have we overdone this a little bit? And then within that conversation, I think a renewed like the trans element of it is, I think, separating out from like the gay lesbian thing early on is like too many letters got added. And so I think some of the ideological gaps and shifts have begun to mature in the network there, so to speak. And then obviously we have scientific development of your European countries banning hormone blockers and that sort of thing for minors. So there's some ideological tensions within what fit under the pride flag early on that are coming to light now too, which might be taking some of the steam out of it. And then I think I always had the sense that it was interesting to me to watch like who got excited about these kinds of things on the more activism side, and it was usually older people who this was all very new for. And now we're living in a time in which for my kids, for your kids, like there's nothing new about this. Like it's old news. And so it's lost some of its um excitement.
And it's
Just
mainstream too.
yeah,
It's mainstream. I mean,
it is not so
it's
it
one
used to be
thing.
countercultural, now it's mainstream culture. So
Exactly.
it doesn't feel edgy to be part of it.
It doesn't, and I think you see murmurings of this, like you said, you talked about comedians and comedy. Well, you see murmurings of this in other pop culture sectors as well. I think in some ways symptomatic of this is something like the new Disney efforts to bring fairy tales up to date. And again, part of this, there's the whole Snow White debacle. A lot of that has to do. We've talked about that before with the disastrous interviews with the star, but also, it's undeniably people are just tired of this constant of politics and this constant revisionism being shoved in their face all the time. So there's that weariness. I have another prediction here, and I'm no prophet, but we have talked before about a lot of good, responsible social critics have pointed to the inherent tensions in the LGBTQIA plus coalition. If you press into this supposed community, it's not really a community. It's more a group of disparate kind of people banding together under the banner of the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah,
And there are massive
but
tensions, for instance,
now we're in
between.
the time in which your average 48-year-old gay guy doesn't think you should give hormone blockers to an 8-year-old.
Exactly. So, and it's getting harder and harder to suppress that, or to keep that, at bay for the sake of politics. I think those tensions are now starting to erupt. So I think you're seeing real schisms happening
Mhm.
here in this group. So it's not, you, you know being united by what you're against is going to work against you when suddenly you find yourself thrust into the mainstream, like we just said. So you're no longer subversive, you're no longer countercultural. You are, I mean, this is the mainstream now, and which comes with all of the hangups there. But now your deep differences are going to start manifesting. And so there's huge tension there too. I think that's probably part of why there's a waning of this whole unified sense of, hey, this is a big deal. Let's talk about this, Pride Month.
Mhm.
I think we're listing a bunch of these different factors that are kind of
Yeah,
undermining that.
and I think, so Cameron, I'm sure that you feel irritated also at times in which maybe somebody will represent Christianity broadly and be like, "Well, all Christians," and you're like, "Nah, that you're," even if they're speaking
Yeah.
affirmingly for you, you're like, "No, you don't represent me." I could see a
Mhm.
sense in which this
Sure.
movement would lose some, and always has. Like, I think most people know, um, people who are gay or lesbian or whatever who never really identified ideologically with parades and corporate sponsorship and all of that. They're kind of like,
Sure.
just let me do my thing, and I don't need you to speak for me. And I wonder if more of that won't be developing along the here too. You talked about repurposing. Let me. This is the thing that sparked this in my mind. So the LA Dodgers baseball team, Clayton Crenshaw, an interesting episode happened with him. So he's outspoken Christian. He had been. Do you remember did we do an episode on the Sisters of the Perpetual Indulgence or something where they had like
Oh, yeah.
that? Do you
W
remember that whole
Yes.
kind of like Catholic Church mockery night or whatever? And he had spoken out against that. But so it's Pride Month in LA. The Dodgers are all wearing hats that the LA symbol is in rainbow colors for Pride Month. And
Mhm.
so he's part of the team. This is the team uniform. He wore the hat. But what got interesting is people noticed that on the edge of his hat, he had written with a paint pen Genesis 9, I think 15 through 17. And Genesis 9, 15 through 17 is a reference to God creating the rainbow and making a covenant saying that he would never flood the earth again as a sign of judgment. And obviously, people saw this as horrible, but a lot of people said, actually, that's kind of an interesting, respectful. He's not he's not saying anything against anybody. He's still participating in the team uniform. He's not throwing a fit, but he's also sticking something on there to say this symbolism still means something else to me other than what it's been co-opted for. And so
Mhm.
I want to throw that out there as a nugget for us to wrestle with of
Yeah.
like what happens when you have a symbol or an idea that's been appropriated, but most people haven't made the shift with that yet. And so that's a is I thought it was a I thought it was an okay form of protest. I'll put it that way. I thought that's just him saying like, "Hey, I'm not out to shame or get anything anybody, but just for the record, Um, just because corporate America says this doesn't mean that my understanding of what a rainbow symbolizes has to shift along with it." And yeah, I thought that was a kind of an interesting little moment there of saying, like, yeah, no, the symbol hasn't fully shifted its meaning.
It's clever because and it's a little bit more subtle. I mean, he didn't take verses that said God created the man and woman,
Right.
which would have been a lot more kind of in your face. But I think, yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting gesture, and it definitely has sparked a lot of good conversations. And I think if we can think more biblically in these terms about our expression, people are interested. And again, like we said, I think there's a growing spiritual openness to it. The conversation around this gesture is different from those concerning football players taking the knee or people doing things that are a little less subtle.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I would say I think it's a pretty interesting way to go about this as well, and I would certainly applaud it.
It's a
But
conversation starter for sure.
yeah, I think we all know though that I'm grateful for people who are, athletes or have some sort of a platform, and I'm always grateful for people using this in a positive way. But I think we all know that really the onus is on us in our own lives now to have these kinds of conversations and to talk about this stuff with just the people in our lives on a more intimate level. And that these kind of national gestures, yeah, I mean, they'll only go so far, but I mean, in the end, this is going to be grassroots stuff that has to happen. We have to actually talk to people and we have to be willing to have those uncomfortable conversations. That's something we come back to again and again on thinking out loud. But I think once again, yeah, I'll stop there for a second.
Well, no, so you're saying you can't have a professional athlete be your champion for your cause and like, oh, I identify with this person or against this person or whatever it happens. Like you have to do the work on this yourself. And so
That's right.
maybe there's some clever examples of so take Clayton Crenshaw not as an example of like, oh, here's this like he really, stuck it to the system kind of thing of I think look at it more of a way in which you have somebody who's in a this is where he works. Like this is a workplace situation where corporate says this is what you will do and this is what you will support and he's trying to find a way to cause as little of a ripple as possible without also having his own personal convictions steamrolled in the process. I think if we look at it like as this is a type of example of that sort of thing, then this can be a helpful illustration for us because all of us run into those types of situations in life where we're like, yeah, I see what you're saying here, but I can't go along. Um, and one option is, you capitulate. One is you make a big fuss and rebel against it, and another is that you have kind of a third alternative way or option to respond. And this seemed to me like a good example of one of those where, um, it's kind of an in between of like, yeah, I'm part of the team. I'm doing what I need to here, but on the other hand, my religious understandings are still valuable and are at play.
I think another interesting facet here is that if you wanna be truly countercultural, not that this is a good noble motivation or anything like that, but I mean, being Christian is actually much more countercultural now. I mean,
Mm,
and there are a couple of people who've been pointing this out recently that because now the counterculture is, if you're thinking 1960s counterculture, that is the mainstream now. But but
all
now
of those people are
Christians
senators and
and
business leaders now, so woohoo.
right. But Christians, and we're talking about devout Christians, practitioners of what we might call thick religion or are suddenly, I mean, there's that this isn't I'm bringing this up with hesitation because, you don't want to the glamour of rebellion is not a good motivating factor, and we don't mean rebellion in the sense of sticking it to the man or, trying to rebel against some system, but just meaning that Christianity actually stands against the prevailing kind of cultural orthodoxy.
Mhm.
And so if that's you, you are on those kinds of social margins. And we've talked a lot of we've I mean there a lot of Christians have made a big deal of this because in North America that's a huge issue, oh, all of a sudden we're the bad guys. Now, or you have negative world language. This is the negative world where Christians are seen as bad and socially pernicious. But the other side of that is yeah, but then that makes Christianity very interesting. It shows a kind of a real principle to it, a real substance to it, a real commitment because people are willing to stand in that space even though they're seen as social pariahs. That's just a shift in s I'm only drawing attention to a shift in social dynamics there that I think is also a relevant part of this conversation.
And when we look at cultural shifts and changes or forms of rebellion, so to speak, there are two. One is where you're fleeing from something, and the other one is where you're moving towards something. So, we've talked about this before. If you look at political revolutions, there there's a very low percentage of people who lead effective rebellions becoming good leaders. So this happens. You could pick country after country after country where you see the insurgent group rises up, throw off the oppressors, and then become as big a despots as the previous group that they threw off. Because there isn't a vision for oughtness, there's just a vision for what shouldn't be. And this happens in corporations, this happens in churches and denominations where people are unsettled and say, we've got to do something different. And so we're going to tear down the thing that is. Fair enough. I don't know that the 1960s had a huge vision of like what the oughtness ought to be. Peace and love are not totally clear to me as what people thought that meant. But then there's the so that's one form of rebellion. Then there's a form of rebellion that sees brokenness but has a clear vision of oughtness in the way that things should be, and says in our effort to move in this direction. It functionally puts us at odds with the culture, but the goal is not to be at odds with the culture. It's to move in a different direction. Um,
Mhm.
it's like it's like being at a basketball game and everybody's leaving afterwards and you realize you left your backpack in the gym and you're going backwards against the
Mm.
crowd to go back and get your backpack. You're not trying to be a rebel. You're just going the other direction for a different purpose. And so a lot of Christianity and I think the spiritual conversations that play to right now, Cameron, are not the church trying to like, oh, we got to go out there and be a rebel and like cast off and throw down all. It's like, no, we're trying to get someplace else, and it's against the grain and the flow of what's going on in the world around us, and so we experience that pressure, but it's not out of a need to cause a scene so much as just to say, no, we're headed in a different direction.
Yeah, and we bow the knee to Christ, not to Caesar, in
Yeah.
whatever guise Caesar appears. Yeah, I think I come back to this often, Nathan. There was a book that came out by Larry Hurtado a couple years ago with a very metal title, Destroyer of Gods. Destroyer of Gods, of course, is Jesus in the context of the Roman Empire,
Mhm.
because Christians were called atheists at one point because of all of the gods they denied. But he talked about household gods. He was just isolating certain social customs and practices that automatically would have alienated the pagan neighbors of young Christians, and this was one of them. It was just customary. You go to somebody's home and you offer a libation to the household god. As a social custom,
Mhm.
this is just what you did. Christians, of course, abstained from this practice, which made things awkward. Especially, imagine you're going over to your boss's house or something like that. This doesn't actually, this certainly doesn't do you any favors. And of course, household gods never go away. We have our own household gods in this culture. And, a lot of them these days really have to do with identity and how you exercise your freedom, how you define yourself. And when Christians don't offer the libations to those sacred, gods, there's tension and it erupts. And I think that tension has played out in a very shrill in very shrill terms in the media for a long time. But it also is now doing the good work behind the scenes of inspiring questions. Why are you like that? Why
Mhm.
don't you what I mean, why don't you think of freedom in terms of just being free from all constraints, or, just throwing off the chains and fetters and doing whatever you want, or expressing yourself
Mhm.
however you want? Now that
Why am I not the
there's such a
primary authority
sense.
in my own identity?
Yeah. And now that there's a growing sense of emptiness and fear and loneliness and a lack of purpose and meaning, there's a growing interest in people who have a purpose and a meaning and a sense of freedom that's independent of them. That's actually really compelling. And it is countercultural, but in the best kind of way. And it does challenge prevailing social norms, but in the best kind of way. Not in a destructive, desecrating kind of fashion, but in a constructive way. I mean, the Christian ethos is, if you see it, it's outworking in culture. It's a building ethos. It's a community building ethos. It's built on love and commitment to the one who made us, someone greater than us, but someone who loves us. So
Mhm.
I think there's a growing sense that there's a recognition of, well, I mean, there's the civilizational piece where people look at the institutions that we cherish and love, the way we look at human beings, the way our laws were established in the West, and responsible historians and sociologists and from all walks of life are recognizing that. I think there's a growing interest in it and a growing openness to it. And this Pride Month, I've felt that, and it's been encouraging.
The thing here is, Cameron, that I think is important for all Christians listening to this and Pride Month or any other thing that you're like, "Oh, okay, there's some fundamental concepts and theological and anthropological concepts here that, we don't believe lead to flourishing." But it's people who react out of fear, you're missing the point. Like, that's not how Jesus interacted in the world. It's not something to be scared of. So you can be concerned, but not out of fear, out of a sense of, I mean, the problem with idolatry and false gods or household gods is that they starve you to death. They don't ultimately provide what you need as a human. And so Jesus's vision of engagement, and this is to paint a bigger and a more beautiful picture and to invite people into it, is to tell the full story and invite. So I think the people who are, air quotes, rebelling here, against things, are saying, no, you're trying to convince me. It's kind of like if you've eaten a real apple and then somebody gives you like a plastic table decoration apple. Like, it doesn't matter how much you try to convince me this is a real apple. Like, I've eaten a real apple. I know this isn't a real apple. And I wish that that was the, not in an arrogant sense, but I wish that was the confidence that Christians more often had in engaging the world of like, no, I've tasted and I've seen that the Lord is good and that his ways are good. Like, so it doesn't matter how many $1,000,000 of marketing budget you throw at me, like, you're not going to convince me otherwise. Um, and so I'm not responding out of fear. It's just I have a deeper confidence in something more beautiful, and I would rather you shift and see things my way because that would be better for both of us than for me to see things your way because that's you're asking me to step into a smaller vision.
much more can be said. We usually we'll see if what'll be interesting, Nathan, is to see if next summer what our conversation looks like in this month, given the changing dynamics we've described. But at any rate, we have, of course, not settled the matter. What we've tried to do is give some tools for thought here, constructive thinking, and we thank you, of course, for coming along for the ride. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.